If you are into guitars, you probably have heard of the term G.A.S. And if you have been into guitars long enough, you probably know it stands for Gear Acquisition Syndrome. Are you tone chasing, are you collecting, or are you having G.A.S? And most importantly, are you throwing your money away? To determine that, let's define what G.A.S actually is. For instance, you see a Pelham Blue Firebird which you think looks pretty. You don't own one yet, and the possibility to buy one makes you want one. And only then you start to think that this Firebird might actually also sound cool. Since the need to get one didn't come from the need of a particular sound, this will be qualified as G.A.S by me. So in a case similar to this, you are not tone chasing. Or could you be a collector maybe? Of course, if you collect guitars, if you have the financial means, and if you're actually considering purchasing one of these, that could be considered collecting. Yet, it could still be G.A.S, because there's a thin line between collecting, tone chasing and G.A.S. I will not go into collecting too much in this video, because I think that's a very specific group of guitar players. This video is for most of us who spent a lot of money on gear and walk the thin line between tone chasing and G.A.S. And I think all of us have been there at one point or another. I consider myself a tone chaser, but it is something that has gotten more extreme the longer I play guitar. And at one point or another I have been guilty of gear acquisition syndrome. And that's why I try to put some thought process into gear purchases, just to make sure I make the right decisions. You might still be at a point where you're trying to find out yourself and your sound, and at this point all of this is going to be more difficult. Basically, you're gonna have to try a lot of gear to find out what you like, and the best way to start is to find out what your favorite guitar players are using as a reference. But don't go buying a vintage Marshall Plexi right away just because your favorite guitar player uses one. Find something within a reasonable budget to get you into the ballpark and to dip your toes into the water. The thing is, you might like the sound when another player is using it, but you might not like the feel and the sound when you're playing it yourself. For instance, I love the sound of a Blackface Fender Deluxe, but I just don't like playing one myself. And that is something that I have experienced through trial and error. So at the beginning of your tone chasing journey, don't go in head first. Try and compare as much gear as you can without going all in. If you have already established a solid foundation for your sound, try to find out what types of sound are still missing or which sounds you are not completely happy with. For instance, if you're not happy with your delay sound, do some research to find out what you actually want and what gear could bring you that sound. Once you've done your research and you're down to a few pieces of gear, try them out. Of course you could go to a store, but if you can find a web shop with a good return policy, you can try them out in the comfort of your own home with your own gear and see what works for you. Sometimes you just might be curious about certain gear, and in many of those cases it involves pedals. A 30-day return policy might not be enough to find out if something is actually a useful addition to your rig. And in those cases, buy a cheap version first. You can get an affordable clone or DIY kit for around $30 for most pedals. Do that first and see if you actually like and would use the pedal enough to spend more money on a decent version. I did that many times and it worked out great for me. That way you are not spending hundreds of dollars, pounds or euros on a piece of gear that you will rarely use or even start to dislike after a while. And in the meantime, those cheap clones will make good backups, and once you've got enough of them, selling them will get you enough money to get something nicer instead. Still, the further you get, the more details you start looking for, or you just start asking yourself what else you could need. Sometimes the tone chasing stops, but for most of us it never does. And here you might get close to G.A.S territory again. In this case, look for the best deals possible, either new or used. If you're aware of the prices, buy something at a price point where you know you can at least break even, or better yet, make a profit if you decide to sell it later. And this leads into my most important tip. Get yourself an envelope, a box or something similar to put your money in just for gear. You sell something you no longer need, put the money in there. It will make you aware of what you're spending on gear, but it will also motivate you to make profits, get deals, and it makes you think about what you're purchasing. This method might sound a bit silly and on the nose, but it actually works. Everything you sell will get put separately, and it's also where you take money from to buy new gear. And with this method, you don't buy unnecessary gear as quick, but it's easier to sell off gear you don't actually need. In the end, thinking before buying is the best way to beat gear acquisition syndrome. Still, do your research, think about your purchases, and try as much as you can while spending as little money as possible, and stay on the lookout for good deals. Eventually, you work yourself into a position where you have great gear that works for you while also building up savings for new gear, as long as you buy and sell smart. After a few years, you can afford stuff that you at first never thought were possible. How has your tone chasing journey been so far, and do you often suffer from gas? Please let me know in the comments below. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and I'll see you next time.